Hello, hello.
Hi, everybody. This is Paul Rosselli. It's about 20 past 6. We've got another 10 minutes to go. So hold on. If you have any questions about Zoom or anything related to connecting, please. Hi, everybody. This is Paul Rosselli. It's about 20 past 6. We've got another 10 minutes to go. Just so you know, we're live on YouTube and on Facebook. And this presentation will be simulcast to those two places. Hi, everyone. This is Paul Rosselli from the Burrellville Land Trust. We'll be starting in about 5 minutes. We're joined by Dr. Joseph Berryhill. He'll be giving the presentation starting at about 6:30. So hang in, hang on. We're almost there. By the way, we're live on Twitter as well as, live on Facebook as well as YouTube. And we are joined right now by a bunch of folks who are on both of those social media platforms. We'll begin in about 5 minutes.
Paul, can you hear me? Okay.
There we go. Yep, I can surely hear you. Hi, everybody. It's Paul Rosselli from the Burrellville Land Trust. We're live on both Zoom and YouTube and Facebook. We've got a presentation starting in a few minutes. We're joined right now by Dr. Joseph Berryhill and his presentation, my introduction and his presentation will begin exactly at 6:30. So just a few minutes from now. So hi, everybody. Paul Rosselli from the Burrellville Land Trust. For those of you who know me and have been on some of these Zoom meetings before, you know I love to start exactly on time, and we'll try to end on time as well. I want to welcome you all. What has been a very active, busy month for the Burrellville Land Trust. We have we were going to host a lot of these in the real world with face-to-face interactions, going out and taking hikes in the woods and holding meetings all over the town of Burrillville. With COVID-19, that all changed, and all of our presentations ended up being online here. I'm happy that it's worked out that way, and they've been very successful over these last several weeks. None more so than I'm sure tonight. I'm going to introduce Dr. Joseph Berryhill and then get into his presentation. If you have questions along the way, there's a chat box. If you're looking at your screen on the right-hand side, feel free to type them in. I will try to field them every once in a while and ask Dr. Berryhill about your request for something, a question to be answered. If you have any questions along the way, type them in. After Dr. Berryhill's presentation, we'll open up the microphones and you can ask away. I will do my best to moderate all of this and make sure everybody has an equal chance to ask as many questions as you want. Just so you know, we are live on YouTube. We've got about, looks like right now, about 30 something people who are on YouTube, about 10 or 12 on Facebook. And here we have 5 or 6 people who have joined us here tonight on this Zoom meeting. Let me introduce Dr. Joseph Berryhill and then give him the floor. Joseph Berryhill is a clinical psychologist at the Pediatric Anxiety Research Center through Bradley Hospital. He specializes in the use of cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy to treat pediatric anxiety disorders. Dr. Berryhill received his BA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and his PhD in clinical and community psychology from the University of South Carolina. He completed his education with a clinical internship and a postdoctoral fellowship at the Yale University's School of Medicine. Tonight, he will be talking about his title of his presentation is Breaking Out, Making a Meaningful Life and Sustainable World Together During and After the COVID-19 Outbreak. So with all of that, I'm going to give the floor and the Zoom meeting to Dr. Joseph Berryhill. And I'm going to mute my microphone and I would ask to do the same. And then we'll open up the floor for questions a little later. So Dr. Berryhill, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ideally share my screen here with you. Don't panic if you don't like PowerPoint, because I don't really either. But let me pause there. Paul, is that visible? Is that working right now? Okay. And as Paul said, I'm a clinical and a community psychologist, and I thought I would speak to both of my fields tonight in trying to understand how we can cope with COVID and create, not only get through it, but make it a time that can be meaningful and one in which ideally, if we want to, we can start to look for change in areas of our world that need it. So tonight, I'm going to talk about anxiety and some of the accompanying feelings that come with that. I'm going to talk about factors that contribute to anxiety. All this is going to be brief, by the way. We're going to explore ways that we can respond personally to create a good life for ourselves in a really stressful time. And what I want to do is do this with you. So if you are having questions, if you will type them in or communicate them to Paul or jump in if that's possible. I don't want to, I'm not sure how this will work virtually, but I would much rather have an interchange with you rather than try to just speak to you and tell you the way you should be feeling. That doesn't work too well. So let me jump right in. Oops, forgot about making the world better. That's an important one. So let's jump in with a little humor. I'll pause for a second, let you read it. And one of the things about humor is it's a great antidote for anxiety. As fantastic as our brains are, we really aren't that great at doing two things at once. And if we can allow humor and fun to come into our lives, that is a great antidote for the worries and stress that come our way. So one thing I do in my work with kids and families, and by the way, I work with adults as well on anxiety, is to help them understand it. And one thing I start off by saying is anxiety is like an automatic protection system. If you are at your home right now and there's an incredibly loud bang right outside your window, you are not going to need to ask Paul's permission or anything before you startle and look out and see what's going on. And that's because your brains are ready at any given moment to protect you. And a loud noise is a warning to your brain that something dangerous could be going on out there. And you're going to start checking into it without needing any frontal lobe or higher thinking activity to do so. Our automatic reactions are fight and flight. Most people have probably heard of those. So once we figure out that something's going on that's worrying us, we can very quickly go into a mode to say, I'm going to protect myself. So if that loud noise was an intruder trying to come into your house, you might be grabbing a baseball bat and be ready to go after them. On the other hand, if it's somebody who looks like they're really much better armed than you are with your baseball bat, then you might use the flight response and start to look for ways to get away. Now, anxiety, of course, doesn't usually come in such a stark way. But we can do the same things. We can get very angry and tense about the worries that we're having, or we can try very hard to avoid them and not think about them, which I hope I'll make clear is not a great strategy. And things like COVID-19 that do create a lot of anxiety are going to be unavoidable for the entire world right now. And yet that anxiety can be offset. It's going to be a main purpose of my talk tonight and our interchanges tonight to talk about how that can happen. So when we think about the coronavirus, I found it helpful to think about, there's a professor at Rutgers named Howard Leventhal who has something called the symmetry rule, which simply means if we have a medical symptom, we're going to look for an attribution for it. So what's causing this thing? What is this thing? What's going on? And as I do that, the way I'm thinking about it is going to have a huge impact on the way I'm feeling and the way I might be worrying. So to give you an example of how things can spiral in a way that is not good at all, if tomorrow morning I wake up and cough, what do you think? What am I going to be thinking? I think it's going to be this. I'm going to be thinking, this is COVID-19. Did I not wipe down that delivery well? Or should I have not been right behind that jogger? That in turn is going to lead me to anxiety and that fight flight thing I talked about, with my body reacting in ways like my heart can start racing. Oh my gosh, COVID-19, what does that mean? Shortness of breath, sweating. And think about it for a second. As those things are going on in my body, that already doesn't feel good. So that may contribute back to thinking, oh, I do have COVID-19. And then that's making me get even more panicky. So I've got a double arrow here. Sorry, my pointing isn't going to help you. But that's going to lead me back to thinking, oh gosh, something really is wrong and might ramp up my body even more. So we're getting into a nasty, probably should call it a cycle instead of a spiral. And it can continue. So other worries can now pop up like, oh, am I going to infect my kids or somebody else? Or is the very worst thing going to happen? Am I going to die from this illness? And by the way, I'll just say right now, because I'm worried I'll forget later, one thing we can think about that can help us is, I think that medical experts' estimates are that about 80% of COVID-19 cases are pretty mild. that doesn't mean that it would be okay to have it or nice to have it. But in the grand scheme of things, not so different from probably other illnesses you've experienced in your life. But that other 20% do get very serious. So of course it is reason for concern. And as I'm being led to these worries about infecting somebody, I'm right back to my body ramping up and thinking I have this. So as you can see, if this kind of cycle or spiral continues too long, could be headed at my worst for something like a panic attack, and could wind up in the very place that I don't want to be, in a hospital, worried that I'm having a heart attack or something like that. So there are certainly other things that can make us anxious in this era besides waking up with a cough or feeling like we have a fever. We have limited psychological research on things like Zika and other infectious diseases, but what we do have demonstrate that the way we get information about them also has an impact on how we're feeling. So, for example, the Zika study showed that social media exposure actually caused people to feel worse than traditional media exposure. And I'm not sure we have an exact explanation for that, but my thought would be that in social media, there's so much speculation, there are so many things that circulate and questions and hypotheses that's certainly anxiety being ready to protect us would latch on to things that people might be saying there. So that might lead you to say, well, traditional media would be a better way to go. And I certainly do encourage people to stay in touch with the media and what's happening in Rhode Island and New England and beyond. But at the same time, we have evidence that too much media exposure, even to quote unquote good sources, can be bad for us. There was a study in the aftermath of the bombing of the Boston Marathon in 1993. Sorry, not 1993. It's about 10 years ago. That showed that people who spent a lot of time on traditional media, looking at the stories over and over again, were winding up feeling more acute stress than people who did not do that. So one thing that I would throw out is to encourage people to, yes, stay in touch with what's going on, but not try to do that too obsessively. As I'm going to note later, part of what anxiety pushes us to do is to get certainty about things. It doesn't like it when it's unsure of what's going on. So there's a press inside of us to figure things out. What's going on? What do I need to do about it? But when I'm working with kids and families, I often compare this to if you have a kid at the grocery store and we're checking out, and of course I'm talking about pre-social distancing times. If the kid says, here, get me this candy bar. Sorry, I don't have a candy bar with me. If they say, get me the candy bar, and the parent says no, and then the kid starts to throw a tantrum, I want the candy bar. Starts screaming for the candy bar, starts making noise for the candy bar. It's very tempting in that moment to give the kid the candy bar because that's going to make them be quiet. And now the store is going to stop looking at you. But as pretty much every kid and parent I ever ask that question to, if I say, should you give the kid the candy bar, I pretty invariably hear no. That's the correct answer because what the child is going to learn is that they're going to scream for a candy bar next time. Anxiety at its worst is a bit like a tantruming child. It is jumping up inside of you and going, I want certainty. Tell me I'm going to be okay. Tell me we understand this. Tell me exactly what to do about X, Y, and Z. And if we sit on traditional media or other sources and continue to try to find that answer, we're actually feeding anxiety. It's just like giving the kid the candy bar. We're giving the anxiety exactly what it wants. And so one message I will have tonight that is a hard one is that embracing uncertainty and being able to live with it is our path forward. And the truth is that I don't know, I don't have any piece of paper that tells me that when I commute back over to this office tomorrow morning to work, that somebody's not gonna run into my bicycle while they're texting. I commute by bike. So the truth is, we don't have guarantees about what's going on. We just tend to think we do. Other things, well, let me pause right there. Paul, is anybody having any questions? Anybody want to jump in at this point? Okay. If you do have questions, feel free to chat them in or write them down. Other things that make anxiety worse. Paul Slovak, University of Oregon, tends to find that anxiety is worse when we face a new and unfamiliar threat, when we feel a sense of loss of control over that threat. In other words, there's not too much I can do about it. And when we have a sense of dread. So for example, when we're exposed to lots of stories about illness and death. So I take a deep breath here and pause and sigh and look at that list, and what you're really seeing is a perfect storm, right, for COVID-19. It fits all of the things that make anxiety worse. So one message is that if you've been feeling bad and you've been feeling anxious, well, then you're normal. Your anxiety is doing what it's supposed to do. And it can be quite helpful. My job is to help shrink up anxiety, but that's the metaphor I always like to use, is shrink it up, not eliminate it, not control it, because we can't do that. And if we could, we wouldn't want to. Paul, did I see your hand?
Yeah, and that feeds into my question, if you don't mind. Getting back to the nasty spiral, do we become complacent with the overload of information, a feeling like, well, I'm okay, things seem to be okay, I feel fine. Having this, I wrote down a teenage anxiety or a teenage attitude. I'm invulnerable. Plus, we hear all the time, we're going to be okay. What happens to that nasty spiral if all of a sudden we become complacent?
Well, that also, in this case, would be an unhelpful response. So one thing we have to think about when we're coming in contact with anxiety is what's happening is my brain is setting off an alarm. And the question we can always ask, anxiety is at its worst, by the way, when we don't recognize it. So it can be very helpful if, when we're having a question like, oh my gosh, do I had COVID-19, to go, okay, anxiety is pushing on me right now. And when we are able to do that, then we're able to get some psychological distance from anxiety. That psychological distance can help us to be more rational in our thinking about, well, is this like a real threat or just one that my brain is telling me is a threat? So in the case of COVID-19, we have a real threat. We actually don't want to become complacent and just say, well, okay, I think everything's fine. I don't think it's a big deal. We want to follow the public health experts' advice to us to follow social distancing and stay 6 feet away, because this is a true alarm. Other ones can be false alarms. I mean, that spiral I had when I woke up and coughed, and I did have a cough yesterday, as a matter of fact, is one that's a false alarm. Many times, of course, we don't know. Things are in the middle. Is this helpful, Paul? Okay. I'll try to get back to that psychological distance, though, because that's a really important point. So what we do for anxiety is, the main treatment that has a lot of scientific validity to it is what we call exposure therapy. I put up the full name, gradual exposure with response prevention, but I'll pause for a second and let you look at the cartoon example of exposure therapy. And that is not the kind of exposure therapy we typically do, because that is the opposite of a gradual exposure. If a person really did have fears of heights, snakes in the dark, which could be true, though we're predisposed to have some worries about all of those things for good reason. You can fall from heights, you can get bitten by snakes, and you do not see as well in the dark. But what we do with our therapy is to work both with children and adults to identify what the fears are. And upon knowing the fears, we then work towards developing motivation for the person having the fears to take small steps in the direction of confronting their fears. So for example, if you were afraid of snakes, instead of being thrown into a dark place with a bunch of them crawling on you, you could start by just hearing the word snake. And for some people who have a serious snake phobia, this may be a hard one for people to imagine, because most people have a little bit of, whoops, I'm going to back off if I hear about one. When we think of somebody needing exposure therapy, you're talking about somebody who like won't go outside because they're worried they could encounter a snake, which of course could be true. So we could start with the word snake. We could then move to a picture of a snake. And we could make sure that that snake was one that the person knew, for example, wasn't poisonous, if that was a fear. We could then move to videos of snakes. We could then move to having a snake near you, but you could be across the room from it. Then we could move you to getting closer to it, to touching it, perhaps with gloves on it first, then later on to touching it without gloves, and then getting to the point where you could actually hold the snake and have it crawl on you. And that therapy actually, if somebody is really seriously interested in getting rid of it, can be done in a matter of hours if somebody is really motivated and there's the time available to do it. So that's exposure therapy in a nutshell. And you might be thinking, well, okay, but we don't want to be exposed to the coronavirus. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid, which is true. So in this case, exposure therapy, I'm going to speak briefly to, and I'll be happy to take more questions later. But if you're wanting your anxiety to go down, an exposure would look something along the lines of, like if I have come back from the grocery store and I'm terrified because I remember touching my face and I can't stop thinking about it, then what I'm trying to do probably is switch the channel and avoid it. But because anxiety is trying to protect me, it won't let me avoid it. That thought keeps resurfacing and resurfacing. So ironically, the way to get rid of that thought is to focus on it. So I could then focus on, by writing it, saying it, hearing it, reading it, maybe I have coronavirus germs on me. Maybe I have coronavirus germs on me. And over and over again. It's a bit akin to if you watch a movie with a scary scene, here comes the scary scene, the hero or heroine nearly gets it and you jump. But if you go back and look at that scene again, next time it's probably more like this, like, ooh, ooh, yeah, ooh, wow. Third time, little reaction. 10th time, 20th time, 100th time, you are saying, I'm bored now. This isn't scaring me anymore. So if you can continue to stay with the fear that you have, your brain will start to habituate to it, is the technical term, or I often call it GUTI, G-U-T-I, for get used to it. I will pause there and see if anybody has a question. Okay. So I want to talk about another therapy too that can lead us past exposures. Exposures are fantastic at reducing anxiety, but another therapy called ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, actually challenges us to live the lives we want to live. And the current challenge I'm having for all my clients is Can you engage in your life in ways right now that allow you to not just look back and think, oh my gosh, that time when the pandemic was going was awful and stressful, but we hunkered down and got through it, but rather maybe say, when this thing's over, and it is going to end, we just don't know when, can you go back and say, wow, well, that was a stressful time, but that was the time I discovered or figured out something about myself, about who I am, or connected in new ways with loved ones or friends, or discovered something new to do, or connected with nature, which I'll come back to. So ACT has a bunch of different parts. I'm just going to highlight a couple, and I'm going to move a little bit fast because I'm looking at the clock and I'm talking too much. The first one is acceptance. We take anxiety with us. The exposure I just gave you was an example of it. I didn't try to get rid of it. I didn't try to control anxiety. I actually said, okay, I can't stop thinking about this, so I'm going to start thinking about it. I'm going to really focus on it till it starts to become more boring than scary. And this is an important part of therapy, because in the past, we used to think about things like helping folks and saying like, well, we're going to stamp out anxiety. So, and as I've already said, we can't do that. So if you had two people who had social anxiety before, both of them might go to a party and both of them might talk to, say, 3 different people and maybe make a real connection with one person. And the first person might go home and think, why am I such a loser? Why was it so hard for me to go to that party? Why did I only talk to 3 people? Why is this stuff always going to be hard for me? And you can see they're not feeling good. If the second one says, I'm a rock star, I have a ton of anxiety, and I went to the party and I talked to 3 people and I had this in-depth conversation with one, I think I have a new friend. I'm living the life I want to live. That's acceptance. Mindfulness, borrowing from Amy Saltzman, is being in contact with the present moment with kindness and curiosity that helps us decide what to do. This is the thing that can help us create some of that psychological distance. If I'm not being mindful, I can't stop long enough to break out of the worry that's pounding me. But if I can come into contact with the present moment and just notice what's happening with my 5 senses, with kindness and curiosity, compassion towards myself, towards other people, curiosity about what's going on, now I can get in a better position to decide, okay, how am I going to handle this problem that's going on? An example of mindfulness is often done with a raisin. If a lot of us want a snack, we might grab some raisins and we might eat them very quickly like Homer Simpson and not even notice much about them. But if you stop and be mindful about your eating, you will notice a lot about the appearance of that raisin. There are a lot of intricate wrinkles and patterns to it. If you touched it and held it before you ate it, you would notice probably some stickiness and an interesting texture. If you smelled it, you would notice a raisiny flavor. Those can be hard to put words to. If you put it in your mouth and didn't chew it immediately, you would notice what it felt like inside with your tongue. And then if you slowly chewed into it, you would notice a sensation of taste emerging. You could also extend that further by taking your mindfulness into thinking about, where did that raisin come from? Well, somebody planted a seed sometime when, and it grew into some grapes. The grapes were only able to grow because of water and sunlight traveling 93 million miles to hit it. And then those grapes had to be exposed to more sun to shrivel them up. Then somebody had to take them and package them and put them on a truck or some form of transport and bring it all the way to Stop and Shop or Whole Foods or somewhere. And then that had to be stocked. You bought it, you brought it home, and here it is on your table. That kind of thinking about your food and your life can lead you to a sense of gratitude, which is another great antidote for anxiety. If you're really feeling in touch with the things that are happening in your life instead of racing right through them, it can be quite helpful. Another part of ACT is identifying values, which simply means what's important to you in all the roles of your life. So in your work, as an employee, as a coworker, at school as a student, if that's part of your life, as a parent or grandparent, as a sibling, as a friend, activist, community member, what is important to you? And this merits a lot of good thinking, and we have probably most of us some time to think about things. So this is an opportunity to figure out who you are and what you want. And I've just popped up here a list of a lot of different values that people might have. Values are not goals. So you have to think of values more as traveling to get somewhere rather than getting somewhere. So my value might be to see new things or to be adventurous, and that might lead me on the road. My goal would be to arrive at San Francisco. A goal is something you can check off. A value is something that keeps going. So you can see up here, being loving, being caring, being adventurous, being flexible, being hardworking. Those don't end. You can't check them off. You keep doing them. And this again is a difference that ACT has brought to therapists like myself and trying to help people not only shrink up nasty villains in their lives like anxiety, but to also figure out what's the life they want to live, so that now that anxiety is out of the way and they can go do it, well, how are they going to do it? Once you've figured out your values, one thing we want to do is take committed actions like these: talking with friends, playing. I've got the values in parentheses there that are underlying the things you can do. I tried to put up things that are committed actions, in other words, things you're doing that are compatible with social distancing guidelines. I think all of these things are doable in some form or another, if one desires to. And so when we're talking about leading a meaningful life, this is where we're at the core of it. Can we identify our values? Can we take committed actions, even right now during a time in which it's tempting just to, shut the door and hunker down? And I just want to point out, speaking of getting out, I'll put a quick disclaimer out there. I don't want anybody to do anything that they consider dangerous. I do want people, if they are going in nature, to continue to practice social distancing. But the experts are telling us if we do that, it is okay to go outside. And we don't have a great number of studies in my field, sadly, about being in nature. But the ones that we do have show that it's really, really good for us, that it has all sorts of positive benefits. So one danger that we're in right now is that being shut up inside so much may be contributing to our problems and making us feel sad, down, depressed, and having other negative emotions. So I wanted to end by just noting one thing I've noted is that COVID-19 has a connection to one of my committed actions is to work on climate change. And the reason I do that is because the environment and other people matter to me. And what the scientists tell us is not taking care of the planet means that those things are going to suffer. And but I do think that a major connection between these two things is that they're both have scientists telling us that non-sustainable, that we're living in ways that aren't sustainable. In the case of COVID-19, the ways that we've been handling animals and doing other things has led to increased dangers of a viral outbreak. In the case of climate change, as most people know, burning fossil fuels and increasing carbon dioxide levels is creating a danger for the planet. I had a video I was thinking about showing, but since I'm running short on time and I'm not living up to my desire to have a conversation with you, I'm going to pause there and open things up for a discussion.
Sure, I'll rely on anybody else who's here. There are just 4 of us here, and that includes you and I.
Okay.
So if there are any questions, please unmute your microphone and ask away. I've got one, and Actually, it's a two-part question. You mentioned earlier about taking anxiety with us, and and for someone who I think at my stage in my life, uh, anxiety comes in all different forms, all during the day. Anxious about getting up, getting to work, getting things done, getting out, exercising, all of those. And to a degree, they're relatively have a higher value or lower value. At what point can you take a higher level of anxiety with you? Like, when does it stop? When do you reach so high that you can't take it with you? So what part of that? I hope I'm making sense. But when does the acceptance or the toleration stop?
Well, I think people recognize it when it happens, right? Things feel, it's kind of that spiral I talked about. If we get into a spiral and our worries are so strong and so deep that we're having trouble getting any of that distance I described from them, then we're may have trouble literally leaving the house. So the idea is that just this sheer act of recognizing anxiety can help create less anxiety. And in a way you can do that is to literally tell yourself, so if I'm having the thought right now, like, oh my gosh, like I'm worried I've bored every single person to death because I've talked too long. With that anxiety pushing on me, I can say, wait, that's anxiety. I'm having the thought that I bored everybody to death. That might be true, it might not. And then I can take it even farther. I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I've bored people. And I can take it even farther. I am aware that I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I've bored everybody. So what I'm doing is trying to distance myself from that thought. All it is a thought. That's what anxiety always breaks down to. It's a thought that's coming in my head. If I can distance myself, I can probably get a better idea, especially over time, of whether that's a true alarm, like, whoa, there is smoke here, let me take action, or oops, it's just the smoke detector going off, and because I sauteed the onions too hard. Does that help? Paul, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, Doris, you have a question.
Yeah, do you know of any studies that are taking place about the effects of forest bathing or whatever it's called these days, or being in nature, that are any schools or places that are actually working on the benefits, to find out how to maximize the benefits of that sort of thing?
Sadly, I don't know that too well. One problem that we have in my field is that in the 1990s, the American Psychological Association declared it the decade of the brain and put all sorts of emphasis and money into all the neat ways we can, take pictures of brains now and study neurons and their brain cells and what they do. And sadly, that has resulted in much, much, much less research on the environmental influence on people. And the environmental influence certainly includes like being in the natural environment or nature. And so what I do see of that literature says it is helpful. I don't know though if I have like the variables of the ways one would do it, which is, I feel like, part of your question. Is that right?
Well, I just for example, Cornell University, for example, was doing a major study on this. Might be some place I could go to check out what they're doing, or if they have any reports. I know even in Rhode Island, the Department of Health is concerned about the effect of trees in urban areas and how that may help the health of and well-being of disadvantaged children. So
Yep. Yep. I do know that there are studies that even just having a window where in your school or residence, if there's a window that can lead you to see green spaces, you tend to have better concentration and less worries. You tend to be more relaxed with the task you're doing as you're sitting near that window than if that same window just is like a concrete jungle, like you might have in some urban areas like Providence. So there is evidence there that we do want contact with nature, that it is good for our brains. Human beings we've lived most of our existence, if you go back tens of thousands of years, in direct contact with nature. And I think it would be unreasonable to think that the new way of living in these past few hundred years of being inside and sitting down and doing sedentary jobs is good for us, is the way our brains were designed for. It wasn't, I don't think.
no, yes, well, we just like to be able to keep my eyes out for who's finding the information or the ways of making that effective for people.
So what I might encourage you to do, if you go back to the University of Washington researcher, his research might lead you to what other folks are doing. Most professors at this point have, like, on their websites, information about their studies and who they're working with. So his name again is Gregory Bratman, Bratman. So if you Googled him for a start, that might lead you places
All right, thanks. Just to have a place to start, because there's a lot of research going on lots of things. So thanks.
Yep. There is research going on. Unfortunately, like I said, most of it, there's a relative paucity of research on things like people being in nature compared to other topics.
All right, hold on. Joseph, we have a question right here.
Yeah, for me.
No, you got to speak over here.
Wait, over here?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
For me, this is all about fear of the unknown. From day to day, we don't know what's happening. We don't know what to expect. We don't know when the next shoe is going to drop. And I think about that daily, fear of the unknown. It's a mystery. How do we cope with that?
Well, ironically, by embracing what you've just described, which is we don't know. And that can feel really scary at first. So again, we might want to go back to a gradual approach towards that. But ultimately, if we want anxiety to be at a level in our lives in which it's adaptive for us, like that alarm is gonna go off if I'm chasing a ball into a busy street, and it's gonna tell me, whoa, stop. That's helpful. That's helpful anxiety. What doesn't help me is to be overwhelmed with uncertainty. So we're back to that point at which if I can embrace the uncertainty that's here, then I can move forward ultimately. So I could start slowly with things and just say, like, I call it living a maybe lifestyle. So for example, I'm going to run a group with Bradley Hospital first thing in the morning. I think I've got a really good plan, but I don't know, if anxiety hits me tonight and goes, I don't know, maybe it's not going to work, then if I embrace that maybe and go, okay, maybe it won't work. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. If I do that long enough, my brain gets used to that idea instead of feeling threatened by it. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but it's the same thing you can think of with exposure therapy. Most people go like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid of snakes, and you're telling me what I want to do is ultimately like have one crawling on me? Yep. And it does work. I've helped so many kids with spider phobias, for example. I've totally gotten used to spiders being on me. I was a little bit infamous at Bradley Hospital for licking trash cans before COVID, because I helped so many kids with germ fears, and we would dig through trash cans together. And I got so used to just being in contact with garbage that it wasn't hard for me anymore. That was not at all who I was before I did exposure therapy. Is this sounding plausible?
Yeah, and I often think about not so much will things get back to normal, because why can we call it normal? Will things get back to our usual way of doing things, our usual day-to-day activities, our usual lifestyle? Will we ever see that again? And if not, I wonder about, my goodness, what will it be?
Well, I think the experts are telling us, yes, things will come back. The virus will run its course. We've seen these things before, not lately, but they have existed before, and they do run their course. What I'm hoping again is that when we reach a point at which social distancing is no longer necessary, and I'm able just to shake someone's hand or hug them, that I can be really, really mindful and grateful and appreciative of it. And so that I won't ever go through my life again having a half-hearted hug, so that the dearth of hugs I'm getting right now can lead to something better in the future for me. That's my hope.
Can I
It's
get
all of our hope. Thank you.
all of our hopes for sure. I want to get back to the gratitude part of it just for a second. Before COVID-19, and there was a dividing point, and boy, you can look at the statistics and find when that dividing point was. People took nature for granted, took the environment for granted. We drove like crazy. I did 400 or 500 miles a week, every week, 52 weeks a year, back and forth to Providence, every meeting, every state house thing, everything. And now I'm down to about, maybe 10 miles a week, if that. But most people, for the environment, it was an eyesore. It was, especially up in the northern part of Rhode Island, it's in our backyards. It's all around us, so we take it for granted. Now, over the last several weeks, and again, there was this dividing line, people are craving to be outside, to go take a walk in the woods. So the question is, does this anxiety lead to gratitude?
Well, it certainly can if a person is ready to walk the path I've tried to lay out tonight, which is if you can decide that you are ready to live the life you want to live and have anxiety come. Notice that
Thank you.
I think one of the values and committed actions I had up there was connecting with friends. Well, if I live that life, anxiety is going to come, because as I'm connecting with friends, I'm going to have hardships in that friendship from time to time. I remember a week or so ago, I wrote an email and my friend responded very, very mad at me. And that was upsetting for me. And so we had a problem in our friendship. And that was anxiety provoking for me. But that was good anxiety. It was anxiety that occurred as I was living the life I wanted to live, being in connection with someone. And luckily we were able to work through the issues that had come up in the email I sent. But anybody in a marriage, for example, knows that in the service of making a commitment to another person and having all the benefits that come with that also entail a lot of headaches and hardships, right? Your spouse does stuff that drives you crazy and you have arguments and things like that. So I think it's about just recognizing that life isn't going to be perfect. I work with a lot of kids who are trying to live that life, because one way you can respond to anxiety is to try to make everything perfect. So if I get every single answer right at school, if I get every single project right at work, then nobody can criticize me and nothing's wrong and everything's okay. Except it's not. It's a little like, I've got my necklace here. It's a little like having Frodo's ring from the Lord of the Rings. And after a while, trying to do everything perfectly really weighs you down and means you can't live as meaningful a life.
I have another question. Do you have any suggestions on how to help people who are grieving at this point? You can't go hug somebody. You can't, as long as you can't do that we normally would do. What are the things that we might be doing? Thanks.
That is an excellent question. So, what sadness comes, one of the major sources of sadness is coming from loss of something. And you've just described it very eloquently. You've lost the ability to have contact with people who you care about. And that is that's a hard thing. I think it is a grieving process in which I would recommend that one feel the sadness and recognize it and be able ideally to express it with other people. Because I think virtually every person on the planet has the same thought you're having there, which is, I miss this. So hopefully that sharing, albeit virtually or at least 6 feet away, can be one source of help, because social support is my field's nerdy term for that. And we have lots of robust evidence for how well it helps both with anxiety and sadness and all sorts of feelings. So I think my main thing would be to say, to feel the feeling, express the feeling with other people, be there to support them as they struggle with it too. This is something females are traditionally better at than males. There's a psychologist named Jean Baker Miller who did a lot of work showing that females really have a lot of shared emotional connections in the way they speak about things and talk with each other. And males would be well behooved to follow it right now. If we can't have the physical contact, we could at least have the emotional contact. So for example, if we're going man to man traditionally, I might say to Paul, I hate to say it, Paul, but I'll even admit I kind of miss the hugs. And Paul might say, yeah, me too, but I'm missing sports, and let's grab a beer. And we're not going to talk about it. Females, on the other hand, might be more like, I'm really missing hugs. Me too. Oh my gosh. Like, I would give anything just to be able to walk over to my neighbor and give her a hug like I used to once a week. And then you're into a time in which, if you can't have the physical contact, at least you're getting that emotional link.
Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Doris, I'm glad that you brought that up about grief, because yeah, things happen. People have died during this, and the family can't grieve in the traditional way. But there's also other things to grieve as well. And it's the lifestyle that we used to have that we can't have now. We're restrained from that. So that's another thing to grieve as well.
I totally agree. I think we have to recognize the sadness and grief that come from the many, many types of losses that are occurring in our lives right now for people, the losses of loved ones, the losses of jobs, the losses of physical contact, and in some cases, contact with nature. I think it's important to feel those feelings.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because I think we're not ever going to go back. We're going to something new, and there will be stuff to grieve. And I don't know if we can prepare ourselves for that, because there will be things that we just won't be there anymore. Something new will be there. It may be better. But I hadn't really thought of it in quite that way, that yeah, we maybe need to be grieving all kinds of things right now.
Well, Yeah, and sorry, this thinking through might temporarily be making people feel a little bit worse, and I'm sorry if that's the case. Um, but yes, eh, there are one thing we know is that life is going to keep changing. I mean, I'm looking at this image of myself. I have all this gray hair. I don't know where that came from. Changes are always occurring, and if we're trying to fight them, we don't get very far. Right now, we're just have had such an abrupt arrival of something that's changed things so fast that I think it's really, really hard for us. But again, it's my hope that if we can if we can recognize anxiety and come to terms with embracing some of the uncertainty and live with acceptance that change is going to occur and try to identify and follow our values and committed actions, that we'll emerge from this better individually and collectively. Certainly my hope.
I think it's the suddenness that's going to get us, like sudden death. If someone's been ill for a long time and things change, that hair gets gray slowly, that's one thing, but
Yep.
this is like having a sudden death to things that we've had in the past.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, sudden
So
loss.
I'm going to take the privilege of asking the last question. So how do we get individuals, kids, adults to appreciate more of what we're all striving, at least in the environmental community, we're all striving to get to, and that is a world that flourishes, species develop and flourish, and our world is safe from pollution and degradation and destruction. How do we get folks to actively be involved? You've taken on the role of doing that. You've done that. You are acting purposefully. How do we get more people like you?
When you say I'm acting purposefully, you're referring to what?
Getting into climate change.
Okay.
Talking about climate change. Yep.
I wish I knew the answer to that. I'm afraid part of the answer does come from our field, and that anxiety, the very anxiety that can be overwhelming right now with COVID and other events in life, and that helps us, can help keep us safe from chasing that ball into the busy street, is not very good at recognizing more long-term threats. And that's why, for example, we weren't all writing our our congressional representatives and so forth and saying, I hope you're ready for a pandemic like SARS nearly was worldwide, and et cetera. We definitely want to take every precaution we can. I don't think any of us were doing that. So it's because ambiguous long-term threats don't activate us as well. So that's the challenge. Same thing with climate change. I mean, it's hard to point with certainty and say, well, this is climate change, although it's becoming more evident for many people with recent events like the fires in Australia, for example. So having thrown out that challenge we face, I think the way is partly through just trying to help all of us live our values and to live our lives fully. And if we're doing that and we're doing it mindfully, I think a lot of us will come to the conclusion that we care about this planet. One thing that's very moving, I find it very healing to be in nature right now and to see it basically feeling exactly the same as it did before COVID. My walk in the woods is the same, except there are more people there now. So that may help. So maybe it'll be a help in the long run. I'm not positive. But the metaphor I could leave you with is that if I'm going to throw a party and I invite my friends and they all come and they're having a good time, and then the doorbell rings and I answer it, and in comes a neighbor who's really gruff and rough and smells bad and acts terrible. And he comes in and starts messing up the party. Well, I throw him out. If he comes back again, I throw him out again. Now I can go stand by the door. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me. I can go live my life and stand by the door and say, he's not getting back into this party. And I can spend time at there and I can keep him out. And I'm going to realize at some point I'm missing the party. So maybe if nothing else than just to be with the people I wanted to be with, I'm going to go do that. And if my neighbor comes, then he comes. And if there's some yuckiness that comes with it, then it comes. So that's my hope, is that all of us can, of course, the party's a metaphor for life, and the neighbor's a metaphor for all the yuckiness, anxiety, COVID. I mean, that's an uninvited party guest. If there was ever an uninvited party guest, it's COVID-19, right? So it's my hope that all of us can not live our lives beside the door trying to stop the bad thing from happening, but to move into life. And I think for most people, if they have a chance to do that, they would be concerned about nature and climate.
Great, great. Dr. Joseph Berryhill, Joseph, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your hour of wisdom and time and experience. Thank you all. We've got one more event coming up on the 30th of April. This was not intentional. However, it's on estate planning. So hope you join us again on April 30th for that. Dr. Berryhill, thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. Have a good night.
Thank you.
So long. Good job.